I never thought something as ordinary as moving into a new house would end up pulling me into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. I remember the excitement I felt the day I first stepped into the old Victorian house I had rented. The place looked charming, almost picturesque, with its peeling paint and creaky floors, which gave it a certain character. But it wasn't long before I started noticing things that made me question whether the house was as charming as it seemed. It started on the very first day. I had barely moved in, the air still smelling of fresh paint and cardboard boxes, when I heard a strange noise. It was a faint, almost inaudible creaking sound that seemed to come from above, like someone walking slowly in the attic. At first, I dismissed it, thinking it was the house settling, the usual noises an old building makes. But as days passed, the noises became more distinct. The creaking turned into footsteps, soft yet deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth up there. I convinced myself it was just the wind or the house's natural creaks, but deep down, a nagging feeling told me something wasn't quite right. It wasn't until one evening, after a particularly long and tiring day, that I decided to investigate. The sun had just set, and the shadows in the house were long and eerie. I sat in the living room, reading a book, trying to ignore the odd sounds from above. But the creaking grew louder, almost rhythmic, as if someone was walking toward me. My curiosity got the better of me. I stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and made my way to the staircase. As I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The attic door loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but I couldn't stop now. I reached out and turned the rusty handle. The door creaked open with a loud groan that sent a chill down my spine. Inside, the attic was filled with old furniture, boxes, and dust-covered relics from the past. It felt as though the air had become heavier, as if something ancient and forgotten was lingering in the room. I swept the flashlight beam across the space, trying to make sense of the jumble of items. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, but then my light caught something unusual. At the far end of the attic, half hidden behind a stack of old newspapers, was an old wooden chest. It wasn't particularly large, but it had a strange aura about it, something that tugged at my instincts, telling me not to get too close. I should have listened to that feeling, but my curiosity, ever growing, overpowered my caution. I walked over to the chest, my heartbeat quickening with every step. The closer I got, the stronger the feeling of unease became. The air in the attic seemed to grow colder, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a shadow move across the wall. But when I turned, there was nothing there. I reached out and touched the chest. It was cold, its surface worn and chipped, as though it had been sitting there for decades. The old leather straps that secured it were thick with dust and cobwebs. I crouched down and tried to open the chest. The straps resisted at first, but with a little force, they gave way. The chest creaked open, revealing its contents. At first glance, it seemed like an assortment of old books, photographs, and trinkets, but then something caught my eye. Tucked beneath the layers of paper was a faded leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. The journal looked like it hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the journal. Something about it felt wrong, but the temptation was too great. I pulled it out carefully and opened the first page. It was filled with scribbled notes. most of them illegible, but the further I read, the more I understood. The journal belonged to someone who had lived in the house long before I ever stepped foot in it. The entries were strange, filled with references to odd occurrences in the attic, whispers that came from the walls, and a growing sense of dread. But one entry caught my attention. It was dated exactly 100 years ago. The voices are getting louder. I can hear them calling to me, telling me to go up into the attic. They say the chest holds the key, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what I might find. My heart raced as I read those words. It was almost as if the journal was warning me, urging me to leave the attic and never return. But the last sentence sent a shiver down my spine. I can't stop now. I have to know. I have to unlock the secrets of the chest. Before I could process what I had just read, the floorboards creaked behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting across the room. But there was nothing there, just the cold, empty attic. Yet, for a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I heard a soft whisper, like someone calling my name. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. I slammed the journal shut and rushed to close the chest, my hands trembling. But as I began to stand up, my flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled to turn it back on, but the light refused to work. The temperature dropped, and I could feel the air in the room thickening, pressing in on me. Then I heard it again. The footsteps. They weren't coming from above anymore. They were coming from behind me, slow and deliberate, like someone moving toward me through the shadows. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I slowly turned around. And there, standing in the far corner of the attic, was a figure. A shadowy figure, barely visible in the dim light, but unmistakably there. My body went numb with fear as I stared at it, too terrified to move. It was tall, its form hazy and indistinct, but its eyes, those eyes glowed like two burning embers in the dark. In that moment, I understood. The house wasn't just old, it was haunted, and the secrets it held were darker and more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. I ran. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the attic, its glowing eyes searing into my memory like a brand. The creaking of the house, once ignorable, now felt sinister. Every sound was a potential threat. Every shadow a reminder that I wasn't alone in this house. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first rays of sunlight poured through the window, I finally felt brave enough to go back up to the attic. I told myself I had imagined it all, that it was just my overactive mind playing tricks on me in the dark. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was wrong with this house, and the chest I had opened had unleashed whatever secrets it had been hiding. I climbed the attic stairs with my heart pounding, clutching the flashlight as though it were a weapon. The space was eerily silent, the morning light filtering through the tiny dust-covered window, casting long shadows across the cluttered floor. The chest sat exactly where I had left it, closed and undisturbed. But the journal was still in my hands, its leather cover cold to the touch. I sat down near the chest, hesitating for a moment before I opened the journal again. I had to know more. Whoever wrote it had experienced something similar, and maybe their words could give me answers, or at least some idea of what I was dealing with. The next entry was dated 2 days after the one I had read before. I can hear them at night now. It's not just whispers anymore. It's laughter, faint but mocking. They know I'm afraid, and they want me to stay afraid. The chest. I think I've made a mistake by opening it. There's something inside, something tied to this house, and it doesn't want to let go. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The entries grew darker, more desperate, detailing how the writer felt, as though they were being watched, even during the day. They wrote of shadows moving in places where no light should have cast them, and of waking up with a feeling of suffocation, as if something unseen was sitting on their chest. Then I found a name, Eleanor Hastings. Eleanor described her life before moving into the house. She was a widow, having lost her husband during the war. She moved into this house in hopes of starting over, but from the very beginning, she felt the same unease I now felt. The chest had been here even then, tucked away in the attic, seemingly forgotten. She had opened it out of curiosity, just as I had, and from that moment on, her life unraveled. One entry stood out more than the others. The ink was smudged as though her hand had been shaking when she wrote it. The voices told me to find the key, but I don't know what they mean. I think the key isn't just an object. It's something I have to remember, something I've forgotten. They keep whispering, "Bring it back," but I don't know what they want. The chest. It's not a box. It's a doorway. A doorway? Her words sent a chill down my spine. I looked back at the chest, now more sinister than ever. Could it really be a doorway? To where? And why had Eleanor been chosen to open it? Why had I? I continued reading, and Eleanor's entries became more fragmented. She wrote of waking up in strange places, of losing time, and of seeing a figure in her dreams. She described it exactly as I had seen it. Tall, shadowy, with glowing eyes. She called it the Keeper. According to her, it was bound to the chest, a guardian of whatever lay beyond. But what truly unsettled me was her final entry. "I've made my decision. Tonight, I'll go back into the attic. I'll confront it. I can't live like this anymore. Constantly afraid, constantly watched. If you're reading this, please don't make the same mistake I did. Don't open the chest. Don't wake it up." That was it. There were no more entries, no explanation of what happened to Eleanor, no closure to her story. Just silence, both on the page and in the attic. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of everything. What had Eleanor meant by the Keeper? And what did she mean by "don't wake it up"? Had I already done that by opening the chest? As I stood to leave, something caught my eye. A faint scratch mark on the floorboards near the chest. Kneeling down, I traced the marks with my fingers. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, almost like a symbol. It looked like some kind of ancient rune, carved deep into the wood, as though to seal something. I suddenly felt the weight of the air in the attic shift, pressing down on me. The shadows around the room seemed to grow darker, denser, as if they were closing in. A faint whisper echoed in my ears, but this time it wasn't coming from the journal or the chest. It was coming from the walls. The voice was soft, almost melodic, but unmistakably malevolent. It spoke words I couldn't understand, a language that felt ancient and heavy with power. My heart raced as I stumbled back, tripping over an old chair and landing hard on the floor. And then, as quickly as it had started, the whispering stopped. The attic was silent once more, but the sense of dread lingered. I grabbed the journal and ran downstairs, slamming the attic door behind me. Whatever was up there, whatever I had disturbed, wasn't done with me. And I knew, deep in my soul, that the shadows of the past weren't just shadows. They were alive, waiting, and they had already started pulling me into their world. I thought I could ignore it. I thought if I avoided the attic, if I stayed away from that chest, everything would go back to normal. But that was a lie I told myself to keep from spiraling. The house had already changed. Or maybe I had. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder at night, weaving through the walls like an invisible presence pacing the house. The shadows seemed to stretch and curl unnaturally in the corners of my vision, darting out of sight whenever I turned to look. The air felt colder, heavier. I wasn't alone anymore. And deep down, I knew I never had been. I spent hours reading through Eleanor's journal again, searching for something, anything, that could explain what was happening to me. But the more I read, the more questions I had. What was the keeper? Why was it bound to the chest? And why was I being drawn into this nightmare? Then I found it. A passage that made my blood run cold. There's a trapdoor beneath the chest. I only saw it when the light hit the floor, at just the right angle. Whatever they're hiding, it's buried down there. I think that's what they want me to find. The source of all of this. A trapdoor. My pulse quickened as I stared at the chest in my mind, replaying the memory of its carved wood, the strange scratches on the floor. Had I missed something? That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I grabbed my flashlight and made my way back to the attic. The door creaked open reluctantly, almost as if the house itself didn't want me up there. The shadows were already gathering, pooling in the far corners of the room, watching me. The chest loomed in the center, a dark and foreboding presence. I hesitated, the flashlight trembling in my grip, but then I crouched down, aiming the beam across the floorboards. At first, I saw nothing but dust and wood. Then, as I shifted the angle of the light, I saw it. Faint lines etched into the floor, forming a perfect square beneath the chest. The trapdoor was real. With a deep breath, I pushed the chest aside. It screeched against the floor, the sound sharp and jarring in the silence. Beneath it, the faint outline of the trapdoor was now fully visible. My heart pounded as I knelt and traced the edges with my fingers. There was no handle, no latch, just a small circular indentation in the center. It looked like a keyhole. Eleanor had mentioned a key in her journal, but she never found it. I thought back to everything I had seen in the house, every odd object I had come across. But nothing stood out as a potential key. That's when I remembered the small drawer in the chest. The one I had ignored during my first search. My hand shook as I opened the drawer. Inside was a single rusted key, its ornate design unmistakably old. How had I missed it before? It was as if the chest had been hiding it until now. The key fit perfectly into the indentation on the trapdoor. As I turned it, a deep, resonant click echoed through the attic. The trapdoor creaked open slightly, revealing a set of narrow stone steps leading downward into darkness. The air that rose from below was damp and stale, carrying with it a faint metallic smell that made my stomach churn. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to leave, to run as far away from this house as possible. But something stronger, a morbid curiosity, a pull I couldn't resist, kept me rooted in place. I stepped onto the first stone step, Then the second. The walls around me were cold and rough, carved out of solid rock. The deeper I went, the darker it became, the faint glow of the attic light disappearing behind me. I kept the flashlight pointed straight ahead, my grip on it tightening as I descended. The staircase ended abruptly, opening into a small circular chamber. The walls were lined with strange symbols, similar to the scratches I had seen on the attic floor. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it lay something that made my blood run cold. A withered, leather-bound book, its cover marked with the same symbols as the walls. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me, echoing off the stone walls. They weren't just voices, they were pleas. Bring it back. Set us free. You've come so far. Finish it. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground as I stared at the book. The air around it seemed to shimmer, almost as if it were alive. Against my better judgment, I reached out and picked it up. The moment my fingers touched the cover, the room shuddered violently. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as the whispers grew deafening. The symbols on the walls began to glow with an eerie crimson light, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then I heard it, a deep, guttural growl that didn't come from the whispers. It came from the darkness behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, but the beam revealed nothing. Just endless shadows, stretching and shifting unnaturally. But I could feel it. A presence, ancient and malevolent, watching me, waiting. The whispers turned to laughter, cold and mocking. As if they knew something I didn't. Clutching the book tightly, I stumbled back up the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The growl followed me, growing louder, closer, until I burst into the attic and slammed the trapdoor shut behind me. The attic was silent again, but I could still feel it. The weight of whatever I had disturbed pressing against the trapdoor, trying to find a way out. And in my hands, the book pulsed faintly, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. I had found the source. But now, I wished I hadn't. I thought that closing the trapdoor would end it. I thought that locking the book away, hidden deep inside the chest again, would shield me from whatever darkness I had unleashed. But the house was no longer just a house. It was a tomb, a place where something old, something terrible, had awakened. The night after my discovery was the worst yet. The air felt suffocating, thick with a presence I could no longer ignore. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes, the ones from the attic, the ones from the shadows. I heard the growl again, low and rumbling. But now, it wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation, reverberating through my bones. I tried to make sense of the book, to understand what it all meant. Eleanor had written about a curse, but the more I read, the more confused I became. The text was written in a language I didn't understand, but the symbols on the pages matched those I had seen on the trapdoor, in the chamber beneath the house and on the chest. There was a pattern, a ritual, a binding, but nothing made sense. As the days passed, I grew weaker. I could barely eat, I didn't dare sleep. Every room I entered felt colder, darker, as though the shadows themselves were closing in. I began to see things, figures, half-formed, dotting at the edges of my vision. The whispers became incessant, repeating the same phrase over and over again. You're not finished. I could no longer ignore it. The curse was never just about the chest, the book, or the attic. It was about me. I had disturbed something far greater than I realized. And now, it was coming for me. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to end it. I couldn't live like this, trapped in this house with a force I didn't understand. I thought of Eleanor, of the way she had tried to confront the darkness in her own way, and failed. The journal's last words haunted me. Don't wake it up. But it was too late. It was already awake. I took the book to the attic, feeling its weight in my hands like a curse in itself. The whispers grew louder as I approached the chest, louder than ever before, until they filled my ears and my mind. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the chest, placing the book back where I had found it. The shadows in the room seemed to recoil, like they were afraid, unwilling to touch the cursed object. But the shadows didn't stay away for long. They were more alive than ever, swirling around the attic, growing thicker, more tangible, as if they had substance. And then I saw it, the figure, standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was the keeper. Its form was no longer a mere shadow, but something more solid, more terrifying, tall, thin, its body draped in tattered black robes that seemed to shift with the darkness. Its face was a void, empty and hollow, with those glowing eyes staring through me, as if it could see my soul. The whispers stopped. In their place, a deep voice filled the room, resonating with power that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. You've disturbed what should never be disturbed. You've opened the door. Now, you will finish what you began. I felt a chill so intense that it numbed my body. The keeper moved toward me, slow but deliberate, its presence growing stronger with each step. My heart raced as I stumbled back, trying to escape, but the attic door slammed shut with an audible thud. I was trapped. The keeper raised its hand, and the shadows in the room began to twist and writhe, bending to its will. It wasn't just the attic that was dark now. The darkness was everywhere, suffocating me, closing in. You are the key, the voice rumbled, and you are the one who will complete the cycle. The curse cannot be undone. It will never end. I remembered the journal, the key Eleanor had described. The trapdoor, the binding. She had tried to stop it, but she failed. And now, it was my turn to face whatever horror I had brought into the world. But as the keeper advanced, something inside me snapped. I couldn't let it win. I had to end this, even if it meant my life. In a desperate attempt, I grabbed the book again. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold it. But somehow, I forced myself to open it. The symbols on the pages glowed, and as I read aloud, the words seemed to come alive, their meaning crashing into me like a flood. Return it, the cycle must complete. Only then will the keeper fade. I didn't know what I was saying or why I was saying it, but the words felt right. They felt necessary. The keeper halted, its eyes narrowing, as though it recognized the power of the words. But it wasn't enough. The shadows were closing in again, their cold fingers brushing against my skin. I realized I wasn't speaking the words in the book. I was summoning something far worse, something older, something that the keeper had tried to bind away. The room began to tremble, the house groaning under the pressure of whatever force was now being awakened. I could feel the weight of it, a suffocating presence that made it hard to breathe, harder to think. "You must finish it," the keeper hissed, its voice growing louder, angrier. "Complete the sacrifice. You are the one who opened the door. You are the one who will close it." I understood now. I had to sacrifice myself to end it. I had opened the chest, awakened the curse, and the only way to seal it was with my own blood. The book had not just been a gateway, it had been a key, and the ritual was incomplete without a price. With trembling hands, I reached for the chest. I didn't know how much time I had left, but the house seemed to close in on me. The keeper's form was now a swirling mass of shadows, its eyes glowing brighter, its voice becoming deafening. I felt the cold press of inevitability as I took the knife from the chest, its blade sharp, its weight heavy in my hand. My heart raced, but I knew what I had to do. As I raised the blade to my chest, the darkness around me began to pulse, retreating as if it were afraid of what was coming. I closed my eyes, whispered the final words from the journal, and pressed the blade into my skin. The shadows screamed. The house shook violently. The keeper's cry of rage echoed through the walls, but it was too late. The ritual was complete. And then there was silence. The darkness lifted. The house, once heavy with the curse, was now quiet, peaceful. The air no longer felt oppressive, and the weight of the presence was gone. I had done it. I had finished what Eleanor had started. But at what cost? As I lay there, exhausted, the book lay in my hands, its pages now blank. The curse had been sealed, but I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else stumbled upon it, just as I had. And when they did, the cycle would begin again. I had ended the curse, but in doing so, I had become part of it.